Welcome back to the Changemaker Podcast. I'm your host, Deke Copenhaver. I'm really psyched about my guest this morning. I don't want to, put expectations too high on him, but an unbelievable guy, John Wood Jr. He is a former nominee for Congress, opinion columnist for USA Today, and national ambassador for Braver Angels, and so much more. But John, welcome to the show, man.
Welcome to the Changemaker Podcast, hosted by Deke Copenhaver. Deke is the author of The Changemaker, a Forbes publishing book that has reached #1 on Amazon on multiple occasions and in multiple categories like management skills and total quality management. During this podcast, Deke interviews exceptional change-making leaders. Deke currently operates Copenhaver Consulting, where he helps local governments and other public organizations maximize their potential. He's also a sought-after public speaker. We hope that the Changemaker has an impact on you today and that you find takeaways that make you a better leader in your life. Now, here's Deke.
Deke, it's a pleasure to be on with you, brother. Good morning to you from Los Angeles.
Well, thank you, man. But so let's just get right into it. So I am so impressed with the work of Braver Angels and what you're doing. So tell our listeners or our viewers that might not know about this organization, what they do, what you do, and what you do with them.
Yeah, by all means. So Braver Angels is America's largest grassroots, bipartisan, cross-partisan organization dedicated to the work of political depolarization. Now, I tend to like to give that explanation some texture by saying what we're really into is reviving the communal fabric of American democracy. We do that in a whole host of different ways. Our work began with a workshop based in principles of family therapy, where we would take small groups of folks from the right and from the left, reds and blues, as we say in-house, and we'd bring them together in a shared space, not so much to argue or debate about politics, but to speak from the vantage point of their own personal experience in terms of why they see politics the way that they do. So it's literally the application of marriage counseling practices to the relationship between Republicans and Democrats. And from that starting point, Braver Angels, which first got going as an organization in 2017, has expanded into a national community of about 13,000 or so members, about 2,500 or so registered and trained volunteers, about 90 some odd local Braver Angels alliances. You can think of these as bipartisan chapters scattered across the map, presence on probably about 65 or so college campuses across America, programs at every level of government, from Congress all the way down to state houses and municipalities and even school boards, digital media, content, podcasts, articles, essays, newsletters, even a singer-songwriter community with about a couple hundred artists and musicians, writing original music, I should say, putting it into practice through events, workshops, programs, places across America, even theater and comedy. All of this holistic sort of cultural and communal experience, and a vastly expanded roster of programs, including a debate program, which is incredibly popular in college campuses and beyond. All of this putting people through a series of experiences, bringing them into relationship with each other across divides in ways that model the sort of country we could be if we remember to get in touch with the humanity and dignity of folks that disagree with us politically, right? So, skipping over a bunch of little details, that's what we do. That's what it looks like. And as Braver Angels National Ambassador, I've tended to be a sort of a chief public representative of our work, and something of a strategic leader for the organization as well. So, yeah, my modest contribution comes in that fashion.
Well, I think it's a little more than modest, but I want to get your take on this, John. So you invited me to an event that you had in Gettysburg the beginning of July. And unfortunately, I was at MD Anderson in Houston and wasn't able to make it. But what you did there, I think it was maybe 3 days. I sort of monitored it through people who went and everything. It was amazing. But there are like 500 bridging organizations in the U.S. now, somewhere around in there. I could find virtually no media coverage of what you did in Gettysburg. And so when I tell people about the work of Braver Angels and, the Millennial Action Project, Bridge USA, what we do with Starts With Us, people are like, man, that excites me so much. I'm excited that's going on. But particularly your event in Gettysburg, they're like, why didn't I know that? I'm like, because I personally think where you had at the optics on that, bringing together Democrats, Republicans, and independents, that to me, call me crazy, it's kind of newsworthy. So for our listeners and viewers that couldn't find anything on it, I'd love for you to share what that was like and what the point of it was, the purpose.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean, no, there was certainly some coverage. There's a wonderful piece written in the New York Times by Times columnist Farrah
Yeah.
Stockman, most specifically about the music at the convention, which was a huge part of it, which I'll get into. We also had folks out from the Deseret News, the Christian Science Monitor, etc. But you're right, Deke, that the mainstream press, on the one hand, there's all sorts of loud bemoanings about the fact that polarization is just so bad, such a big problem, and then on the other hand there's something of it's like a bit like pulling teeth to get them to actually notice the work being done on that issue. And of course there's actually reasons for that. But yes, what was the experience like at Gettysburg? It really was magical and transformational for folks who were present. We had put on a couple of conventions before, back in 2018 and 2019, but had to stop in 2020 just owing to the pandemic. And that really knocked us out for 2021, and we weren't really able to get it together for 22 either. 2023 was the first time that we had done this since then, and we did it on a scale and with a degree of complexity that was far beyond what we had done before. So in this case, last time we did this, we had about 230 people involved. This was closer to 700 this time around. We were at Gettysburg College, Gettysburg, of course, being the site of the Battle of Gettysburg and the Gettysburg Address. And that was quite deliberate, of course. 160 years after Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, following that bloody battle, we had gathered to rise for America. That was the theme of the gathering. At the site of this bloody battle of the Civil War, to prevent another one, which may sound a bit dramatic, but if you're paying attention to events in America, the prospects for some degree of unraveling and even violence, well, we've already seen that bubble up in various moments here over the last few years. It was 3.5 days. Folks arrived Wednesday evening on July 5th, day after the 4th of July. Timing made it a little tough for folks, but we were tapping into the energy of Independence Day as well. And starting on Thursday, the days of the convention were structured as follows. You had a plenary session in the morning that brought the whole delegate body together. After that, you would have breakout sessions, which would be about 12 to 20 or so individual activities that you could electively choose from across the map. We would come back together for another breakout plenary session after break in the afternoon. Folks would come back together for an evening gathering, and then there would be nighttime activities as well. But what exactly were we doing? It was a range of things that included some of your standard sorts of talks and plenaries, interspersed with theater, comedy, music, and some of the conventional sort of workshop offerings that we've always provided. And so these are folks coming together, equal numbers, red and blue, from across America. You could tell because they have red and blue lanyards on, which kind of distinguish them depending on their political leanings, with a fair number of folks with the yellow one on if they don't identify in either particular direction. Couple hundred of these folks
Yeah.
are representing partner organizations from across the map. Organizations as established as Ballotpedia, or from local Rotaries or Exchange clubs, or the LDS Church, all the way down to local barbershops and mom and pop operations. And so it's not all organizations dedicated to depolarization per se in terms of what they do, but they all, as members of civil society, are concerned with the divisions in America's political and democratic life, and want to be a part of healing that that divide. And so we kicked off on Wednesday evening. We kicked things off after an address from President David Blankenhorn with the first of many musical performances from our artists in residence, Gangstagrass. So we have many folks there participating musically. One group in particular headlined Gangstagrass, which they are, if you've never heard of them, Deke, a bluegrass hip hop fusion group with a powerful appeal for working folks from the hood and from the woods, as I've heard some people say. And they really kind of embodied what we were about. And so over the course of these 3.5 days in Gettysburg, folks came together to compare their experiences, talk about the issues that are really dividing the American people, to embody our stories as Americans through art, through theater, through comedy, through music. We had a play that was remarkably moving, in which I happened to play Malcolm X a little bit. I put on my own dramatic hat, where each member.
And I got to see footage of that.
Unfortunately, they're photographs. We didn't actually catch that on film. There was so much going on; it was hard to capture everything in real time. There is some footage of it, but next time we need to get a professional camera crew out for that particular event. We were stretched very thin, and what we realized was that the entire logistical undertaking was making it hard to do sort of quality capturing of everything that was happening simultaneously. Although you'll see incredible footage and content up on the YouTube channel. But it was a play that brought together a range of folks, as if from a fictitious Brave Angels Alliance, talking about their experiences of American life, comparing them with each other, and sort of coming to grips with how it is we could live with each other in the aftermath of some terrible conflict. It was a conflict that we had imagined in the context of the play, but something that could very well happen in reality in America. We had debates over whether or not to vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden, whether or not America is a racist or white supremacist nation, debates on abortion. This brought together people who were old and young. We had folks there, well recognizable politicians. Governor Spencer Cox delivered a featured address. Republican governor from Utah, Congressman Dean Phillips from the state of Utah, Democratic congressman, well known, well respected. Leaders of the LDS Church, Elder Ahmed Corbett in particular, came and joined us. Tavis Smiley, famed journalist, African-American journalist, participated in the panel that I moderated. Extraordinary conversation with my good friend Ian Rowe from the American Enterprise Institute on affirmative action, education, the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. One of my mentors, Professor Harry Boyd, whose father was the only white man on the board of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and who worked as a field organizer for Dr. King in the '60s. Harry was there with us, participated in 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 our comedy skit. Um, which was really enjoyable. We had a comedy skit for one of the plenary sessions that was set in a fictional barber shop, where you had somebody cutting hair and you had somebody talking about this movement to unite the American people. And we, at a barbershop, Deke, you probably know, but like, a lot of folks talk and chat in the barbershop, trade issues back and forth. A lot of times there's just one person who's just really negative about everything that everyone was saying.
yeah.
We cast our co-founder Bill Doherty in that role, and every time he would say something like, "You'll never get Black Lives Matter involved in this," someone like Hawk Newsom from Black Lives Matter would step onto the stage and say, "Well, it turns out I am involved in this," and he'd say, "Well, you're never going to get anybody from the GOP involved in this," and then some prominent Republican from the county would come up, and they'd go back and forth, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. Gangster Grass got up and performed at the end of it. Each one of these moments in the convention served as an emotional experience that allowed us to process through the deep tension in our differences in a way that made our differences worth celebrating, right? Because there are opportunities for us to get each other more deeply. And by the end of it, all of this culminated in our collectively drafting and debating the content of Braver Angels 2023 platform, which is an overarching philosophical statement of our work that then was voted upon by the assembled delegate body on the last day of the convention, ratifying that as an official public statement for Braver Angels to America. Outlining the work and mission that we are involved in, not just Braver Angels, but the wider body of organizations that had come alongside us to launch and lift up what we are calling the civic renewal movement, Deke. And following that, we capped it off with an address from myself, and later that evening ended things with an extraordinary concert featuring not just Gangsta Grass, but a wide range of artists and musicians drawn from across Braver Angels community and beyond. It was sort of extraordinary to see, kind of folks with gray hair up on the dance floor, dancing, bobbing their heads to like bluegrass covers of Tupac songs. It was like, like something you've never seen before.
Yeah.
But it happened, and there was nobody who experienced it who didn't come away from it, I think, touched and changed in some profound way. So it's hard to do it justice, but that's a bit of the flavor of what we experienced, and I think it's put us in a position here to where this movement coalescing along healing the wounds of America's political society. It's small, but it's increasingly mighty. And I think that we demonstrated the fact that, however great the divide seems to be, we are capable of crossing it if hearts are willing. And hearts are indeed willing, And so we're building up the infrastructure to channel that goodwill into meaningful action on the ground across sectors of American life, from government to college campuses to local communities, arts and music, and well beyond.
It's so funny because I've communicated with a lot of people on LinkedIn that were there that have reached out to me. And the sense of hope and excitement, okay, to me, part of good leadership is creating hope for the future in the people you serve. People were so hopeful, which, I think our country is in need of hope now more than ever. But unfortunately, and it's not all politicians that are fear-mongering or anything. You referenced Spencer Cox, the governor of Utah.
Yeah.
Next week, I'm going to be a panelist representing Starts With Us at the National Governors Association meeting in New Hampshire. But so, I think Braver Angels had a part of this, but there's a program, once again, not everybody knows about, that the National Governors Association is doing called Disagree Better, where they're doing um, public service announcements with Democrat and Republican governors to say we don't have to agree on everything, but we can disagree without being disagreeable, and we can work together across party lines to solve America's biggest issues.
Hmm.
So when I'm like an evangelist on this stuff, but when I share any of this with people I know, because it starts with us, did a poll that showed 87% of people are just fed up with extreme polarization.
Hmm.
So when you tap into the 87% and they get to know that things like this are happening, they want to become a part of it. So I see this movement just growing the more word gets out.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think so. You know, it's a complicated thing because I think that there's a great majority of Americans who are sick of the polarization. I think that that's
Yeah.
absolutely true. It doesn't mean that a good number of those folks at the same time do not still feel polarized, right?
Yeah.
And in other words, it is possible to, on the one hand, think like, God, I'm so tired of the fact that I can't talk to my neighbor. But on the other hand, I genuinely fear that the person in the White House is a fascist, whoever the person is, right? And that the news network that other folks are watching is spouting nothing but lies all day. And thank God I've got my favorite pundit on my side or whatever to tell me what I
Yep.
want to hear, right? And so human beings are contradictory creatures, right? And that's just sort of the natural state of things. So in principle, you get very little opposition to the sort of thing that we are doing. But in practice, people need to be able to see what is the pathway towards actually
Yep.
making it real, right? And so, part of the issue with the media coverage, to go back to that point, is that the political media is so invested in a business model that basically profits from polarization that it can be difficult for them to tell the story of the sort of thing that we're building in a serious kind of way. You do get Brave Angels has enjoyed a lot of media coverage over the years, but it tends to be in the human interest sort of category
Yeah.
of coverage, right? It's like, well, look at this workshop that these folks are putting on. This is adorable, and could we use more of that? Now let's go back to our regularly scheduled slandering of
Yeah.
of one side or the other. I mean, I'm being a little bit flippant, obviously, but there's a way in which it's hard for them to engage with the serious movement building um, activities that are going into energy that's going into this work, because it doesn't really fit clearly in anybody's pre-existing business model. And of course, obviously, the political parties themselves, even if it's in the long term, um, even if it's towards the long term uh, destruction of our democratic culture, it's in the short term interests of the parties to chop us up as much as they can and to radicalize constituents in a way that makes them effective activists and voters in election campaigns, and particularly primary campaigns that where 8% of the voters, a lot of times the most polarized 8 or 10%, wind up selecting
Yep.
the folks who govern for everyone else. And so in a world that is operating like that, from the media to the parties, um, where does the work that we're doing fit in? We have to sort of carve out our own space and build our own space, our own spaces that are hospitable for folks coming in from across the spectrum. Now, this is something that we can do within pre-existing institutions. It's something that we're doing in college campuses. We're working with the elected officials who are in a position to engage with us, and in some cases to show some courage to sort of buck the expectations of some of their own voters and colleagues, to be a part of what we're doing. And so we're creating this coalition that's sort of reaching across, both demography, geography, and sectors and institutions, right? To build something that's a little bit new, really, in
Yeah.
American life. an organized, multi-sector, cross-spectrum ecosystem of Americans who are just fighting to get along, right? And to show the rest of the country that it is possible for us to do this in a spirit of genuine goodwill and generosity and compassion and patriotism, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's like we have to build our own incentives for that. We have to build our own structures. We have to build our own formula for success, because we can't just pick up anything that's out there already laying around. The problem with what's already laying around is that it is tuned to the frequency of polarization to begin with. That is the business model of the media and the parties. And so there's a very limited degree to which we can rely on that to get the job done.
It's interesting to me, and I want to get your take on this as well. So when Barack Obama first announced he was running for president, I have a friend of mine that's a Republican lobbyist, great guy, but very much staunchly Republican conservative. And I told my friend, I'm like, he's going to win. And my Republican friend said, he has absolutely no chance. I said, no, he is going to tap into the same thing at the national level that I tapped into at the local level. If you provide people hope and a vision and can get them excited, they'll rally around it. Yeah. So 2008 was not that long ago. I'm happily independent, but Barack Obama inspired people. But I think about Ronald Reagan. I was raised during the Reagan era, but there were Reagan Democrats, and he was able to inspire people as well. So it's just that since Barack Obama, it just does not seem that we've had a lot from either party, a lot of candidates that have been really inspirational and aspirational. And I really want to get your take on that, because I know you're a former congressional nominee, but I believe you were an organizer for the Obama team, but then became a Republican. So you kind of have a unique view, seeing both sides of that. But just what are your thoughts on that? Is there room for inspirational and aspirational leadership politically now?
Yeah, what's amazing about that? So I mean, look, I agree with you. I mean, I'm a Republican now, and my politics became a bit more conservative, but I was deeply inspired by the Obama campaign, for which I worked on a low level in 2008. But I mean, it was Barack Obama who really catalyzed my re-engagement in politics. I was a liberal activist all the way through high school, and I was 5 days too young to vote in 2004, but I had worked, handing out bumper stickers just on my own, and just debating with whoever I could find in defense of Al Gore back in 2000, and then was, actively rooting for John Kerry in 2004. And when he lost, George W. Bush was reelected. At the age of 17, I was like jaded about politics. I just like, the system doesn't work. We elected the wrong guy twice in a row. I don't want to play anymore. And it was Barack Obama who really made me sort of think like, okay, this is worth believing in and working for, and, there's a whole story about the evolution of my politics after that, but I always remained inspired by Obama's campaign. And it's, and what I saw in him was, the mission that I was always carrying, which was to say, bringing the American people together in good faith and in goodwill, remembering that we are more than just the things that divide us. Barack Obama did tap into that in a deep way. Now, what's funny is that was 2008. That was not that long ago, but that was actually a lifetime ago in the context of the evolution of social media and the ways in which technology has taken real differences, real already very much complexifying tensions between the American people, and artificially turbocharged them in a way to where our experience of each other, our elected officials, and the universe of information in the world has become not only polarized, more deeply polarized, but far more deeply siloed into these rabbit holes of social media feeds and information universes that take us into places that, once you really start, going down the rabbit hole, going down the well of information on one subject or another, I mean, it may be a universe of things that are either inaccurate or out of context or, distorted in a million different ways. But that just becomes the space that, people are living in, you know? Um,
Yeah.
I mean, right now, Tucker Carlson, without, dwelling on it too much, is doing an interview with a person talking, spreading very kind of like salacious, stories about Barack Obama's personal life, so on and so forth. This is not an individual who strikes me as particularly credible or anything like that. And even if the things he was saying about Barack Obama's, preferences were true, it's like, okay, well, does that change my opinion on the man? But the point is that this is a story that is just bubbling up for some portion of the electorate, sort of, I guess, radically impacting. I mean, I'm sure these are people who don't like Obama to begin with, but radically impacting, the story that they're telling about who this man really is. And meanwhile, the rest of America is not even sort of in touch with this, just kind of grossed out from the sidelines. And so, these are obstacles that weren't present when Obama was running in 2008. Certainly weren't present when Reagan was running in 1980. Um, you have a face on a screen, and we're moving in a moment where you're not just dealing with that person, you're dealing with the lick that you clink that takes you to sort of the real truth about so and so. And by the time you come out of that rabbit hole, you realize that, like, oh, this person is actually a Marvel villain of some kind, you know and so, we're in uncharted waters as far as the ways in which the information ecosystem distorts our ability to understand reality, and certainly to understand each other, I think. And so I do think that the American people can still be inspired. I would agree with you that there are not too many candidates seeking to do that. Although, interestingly enough, I mean, there are ways in which folks like, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Vivek Ramaswamy are sort of, building, cross-partisan coalitions, because there's
Yeah.
so much shared contempt for the established political class in America
Oh, yeah.
that, yeah, there's room to bridge some divides in that direction. But it's sort of bridging one divide through deepening another in some sense. The populace versus the establishment folks.
You, you know, I understand. So I took advantage of that when I ran in 2005, that I was running against three other candidates, two of whom were sitting commissioners with our local government. So we had polled going into the election. So our commission had a 22% approval rating. So they were touting their experience. And I'm like, look, these guys are a part of a dysfunctional government.
Right.
And I'm not. I will tell you who I got that from. Lisa Borders, who was former president of the City Council of Atlanta. I went through Leadership Georgia with her in 2004, which is when she was elected. I ran in 2005. She said in a debate, another candidate said, "You have no experience with government." She said, "Yes, I have no experience being a part of a dysfunctional government." She's like, "You can use that." So I did. But yeah, you're right. People want folks from outside the system. The concerning thing to me, and so Vivek, he is, he's moving up in the polls. But so I think sometimes to just play to the base, and this is the difference between politics and leadership. Politics is telling people what they want to hear. Leadership is telling people what they need to hear, or creating a vision and selling people on it. But 2 weeks ago, I did a keynote for an FBI leadership conference. And so, I said, first off, I just want to say thank you, because I know the sacrifices that you and your family make to keep the rest of us safe. And I know your organization has been turned into a political issue. I said, but I will also tell you, and don't want to get too political, but I said, I believe that for politicians, particularly presidential candidates,
Yeah.
to talk about doing away with the FBI when
Mm.
it's never going to happen is both irresponsible and dangerous.
Mm.
And so I would ask for your opinion on that. Like Vivek, he's scoring some points with certain people on saying, let's do away with the FBI. But do you think he actually understands that it's probably not going to happen and what America looks like without our main law enforcement division?
Yeah, it's hard for me to speak to how much he's speaking from a sense of what is realistic and how much he's just thinking, well, this is something that people are gonna like to hear. One
Yeah.
thing about being as young as he is and as successful as he is, because this is a man who's made hundreds of millions of dollars in the private sector, and he's not 40 years old yet. Is that I'm sure he thinks he can do anything,
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
hubris that comes with that, um, but I do think that yeah, there is. I'm somebody who believes in the importance of institutions. I
Yeah.
think that what's really worrisome about the moment that we're in, part of what's worrisome about it, is the fact that people left and right, I think, increasingly take for granted the idea that you can have, structures in society that serve a certain function. They're always going to be made up of flawed, imperfect human beings who are going to make
Yes.
mistakes and
Yes.
who are not always going to be perfectly honest. But that at the end of the day, like these are organs in the body. You got to take care of them for the body to function, and you can't just
Yep.
sort of, just willy nilly kind of like surgically, removing and butchering things because, it's like, oh, my kidney doesn't work all that well, so let me just throw it out. Maybe try to get healthy first rather than just ripping everything out. Um, but we have such contempt for that class, right? And that comes from something too. I mean, there is the always the possibility that major institutions in our society can be ideologically captured, can be driven by agendas that do not line up with the welfare of the American people. Those sorts of accusations are now deeply enmeshed in our politics, and there are conversations to be had about, well, has the Justice Department been weaponized? Can we trust our colleges and universities and the Department of Education, for that matter? All of these things. Can we still trust the courts? All of these things are there to be talked about, but we should start, I think, from a foundation that says that institutions are important. They've evolved for a reason. They serve functions that, even as we seek to reform them, should be appreciated and cause us to proceed with some degree of caution and prudence in terms of how we go about changing the status quo. This used to be a conservative way of looking at things, but these days
Yeah.
conservatives are about as radical as radicals, when
Yeah.
it comes to that way of speaking. So, the way Vivek Ramaswamy talks about things in that way is unrecognizable from a traditional sort of conservative vantage
Yeah.
point. So, that at least I can say.
Well, I want to get your take on this though too. So I recently listened to an interview that Katie Couric did with Karl Rove,
Mm.
both of whom are, a part of Starts With Us now. It's really interesting. And Karl Rove is obviously a brilliant guy, but he said, I believe he said, and I'm hearing a lot of this, that ultimately he wasn't so sure that Trump and Biden would be the nominees. He said, I think there's something going out there at the grassroots level that the polls aren't picking up on. He said, it kind of feels like, in whatever 60, when it was Kennedy versus Nixon, both of whom were in their 40s, and the nation was ready
Mm.
to turn the page on the older generation of politicians.
Mm.
So I kind of feel that too. And I was having a discussion with somebody, to see Mitch McConnell and Dianne Feinstein and, to a degree, President Biden, and to a degree, I mean, Trump's age concerns me, but I found it very interesting. I was watching Nikki Haley the other day, and she's very much making that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, if Rove is right and the nation is really ready to turn a page and she's hitting home on that issue, potentially could she be the nominee?
I think if you were to just drop Nikki Haley off in the general election, she would be a very formidable candidate. But she has to go through a primary
Yeah.
process that President Trump is
Yeah.
utterly dominating, right? And so, for that reason alone, I don't think we're likely to see a Haley nomination. I mean, I do agree with you, and I guess I agree with Karl Rove here that Americans are ready to turn the page generationally. But that statement stands in conflict with the fact that on both the Democratic and Republican side, the older front runners just won't allow it. Right.
Yeah. No, exactly.
And because it doesn't, I've seen polling where I think, is it half of Democrats or maybe even a majority want to see someone other than Biden potentially as the nominee. And yet there's not a record of success for presidents that have had competitive primaries going into a general election. Ted Kennedy challenged Jimmy Carter, and Jimmy Carter lost, and that would have been 1980, right? Ronald Reagan challenged Gerald Ford, and Ford lost, and I guess that was 76. This has never been tried and done successfully, and so parties are going to be very wary of that. Biden waited a long time to get here to get to where he is politically, and Donald Trump does not relinquish power and leadership. We have seen that. So the American people are willing to turn the page in that sense. But on the other hand, to jump back to the Republican side, the degree of passion and commitment people have for Donald Trump among his core base of supporters is really remarkable. Donald Trump has a deeper and stronger connection to his base of voters than maybe anything we've seen in American politics for some time. I mean, Barack Obama really passionately inspired, I think, a broader cross section of Americans than Donald Trump has. But in terms of having a base that is just sort of unyielding in its commitment and devotion, Donald Trump is in a position to where there are factions of Republicans. You've got a lot of Republicans who are still more loyal to the party than to Trump. But in the case of Trump, you have a larger percentage of Republicans who are more loyal to the man, right?
Yeah.
And so, they are in it with him. And I think this wasn't the question you asked, but I think that the reason why, at the end of the day, I don't think it's just that Trump has or presents as having working class, friendly policies. I don't even think it's just because Donald Trump is playing on people's, fears or prejudices. Although I think that there's plenty of that. But Donald Trump, I think, is the one politician in my lifetime who has seemed to really, persuasively communicate to rural and Rust Belt working class white folks in particular, although not just them, but particularly them, that he loves them, that he cares about them, that he relates to them, that he understands them, that even though he's a New York billionaire, that basically he's one of them. You've heard the phrase blue collar billionaire used to apply to Donald Trump, because Donald is rough and brash and doesn't take any guff and whatnot, and works hard, and that they are mistreated and alienated by the same forces in society that are always trying to do that to him, do that to the Donald, and so Donald Trump has made a human connection, even if you might think that it's cynical and exploitative in one way or another, but he is connected with people who base voters in the Republican Party, whom John McCain and Mitt Romney, never did, right? And that, frankly,
Yeah.
all of America should be having some greater degree of empathy for. I've got a lot of empathy myself for sort of the Appalachian working class whites that have found themselves drawn to Donald Trump because in their own way, even while this has also been true for urban working class Black folks in inner cities across America in a different context, but these have also been the stepchildren of America for a long time.
Yeah.
The sort of white folks that are accused of having privilege even while they don't have any discernible pathway towards social mobility, the sort of people who find their families falling apart and drowning in the opioid epidemic and locked in small towns that have been industrially dead for decades now, with no hope of a better life. Donald Trump came and spoke to those people when the rest of America had forgotten about them. And until people reckon with that, you'll never be able to challenge Trump's hold on that part of the electorate, because ironically, Trump loved those people more than the rest of us did.
Well, I want to get something back into something that you said at the beginning about, what you did in Gettysburg. You're connecting people through humanity across all lines. So you're a man of faith. You're a Christian, as am I.
Yeah.
I always say I begrudge nobody else's faith tradition. I've got friends of all different faith traditions. But how does your faith play a role in what you do? And I tell people my politics are kind of based on my faith. And I believe that if somebody can't take care of themselves, it should be a combination of, nonprofit, government, faith-based community that takes care of people that absolutely just can't take care of themselves. But I also believe that if you're able-bodied, and can work and have access to a job, you should work. But that's what my faith teaches me. So how does your faith play a role in what you do?
Well, for me, this is all about working towards the realization of God's kingdom. Not that it's something that we do, but it is something that God does through us. I think in a meaningful way. The kingdom of heaven is within you, and so my job as a Christian, put aside everything else I've said, my job as a Christian is to walk in faith in a way that allows myself and my words, my deeds, my heart to be a vessel for His light, for His love, right? And so, I have to try and tame and discipline my own ego, die in my own ego on a daily basis,
Yep.
to remember that, this work flourishes the more we are able to speak to the seed of Christ in the heart of every man and woman, because all of us find our true fulfillment when we are genuinely living in a place of reverence for the Spirit of God in each and every one of us. That's the part of the human being that transcends all of the rest of it, And so, in trying to walk in Christ's footsteps as imperfectly as I'm able to, I and the people I work with, whether they're Christians or not, I mean, I feel that, as we try and demonstrate a willingness and an ability to look past the ways we disagree in a way that says, but we are here to serve each other. We are here to heal and hear and listen to and heal one another. It sparks some resonance, in the human soul that goes past whatever the ideology is, that goes past whatever the politics are.
Exactly.
And it puts all of that in a different frame. It puts all of that in a different context. Everybody has a story for why they believe what they do. The thing that all those stories have in common is that they are human stories. And I think that part of what my faith roots in me is an understanding that, however, much I might disagree with you on certain issues, or even our interpretations of history, etc. You have a part to play in God's design. You have a role to play in God's kingdom, right? And if I
Yep.
am dismissing you as not having that, I am arguing with the Creator, because He created you, right? You know, He put you
Yeah.
here in front of me, same as He put me here in front of you, and so that means we've got to figure out the ways in which the pieces fit together, right? Because
Exactly.
yeah, because our destiny is in the beloved community, as Dr. King put it, which really is, just kind of another way of saying, so God's kingdom, like, that place we can come to where human beings are truly loving one another as they love themselves. I mean, it's an iterative
Yep.
thing over time and so forth. I mean, people always say to me, like, how are you going to get everybody to live like that? We don't need to get everybody to live like that in the next 10 or 20 years. I'm not putting a
No.
timeline on God's kingdom or anything. What I am saying is that we are all here to do our part, you know and it doesn't even take a majority of Americans loving each other well to set the tone for everyone else, and to accomplish some incredible healing in the process. And so, in that sense, I feel incredibly confident, Deke, because I know that the Spirit is more powerful than Twitter or X or whatever it is, or our polarized media landscape, and so forth. We have tools that are unseen, that nevertheless will be felt in the days and months and years to come. And miracles are coming, my friend. Of that, I have no doubt.
I I totally agree with you. I love grassroots engagement. That's where I'm in my element. I can feel it at the grassroots level wherever I go. I may have shared with you, but I'm like, I love music. I'm like, I'm an old hippie at heart. I'm just trying to do what I can to
Yeah.
unite the tribes.
Hmm.
But I'll also say I love punk rock. And I think
Hmm.
punk rock is about rebelling against the status quo.
Hmm.
And I can't think of anything cooler now, which I think the bridging movement needs to be cool, right?
Hmm.
What is cooler
There
than
you
rebelling against the status quo of extreme polarization?
go.
We're doing the work of rebels, man. It's like we're
That's right.
Bob Marley.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. Well, Jesus Christ Superstar. There you there you go.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, look. Yeah, I mean the Holy Spirit is radical, Christ's love is
Yep.
radical. Absolutely is, and I do think that will catch up to the conversation. For all the things we talk about in this polarization context, I do think that one of the long-standing issues here is one that's so long-standing that we don't even think about it as being particularly relevant to the contemporary uh, problem, but it is, which is just sort of the larger religious secular divide, which has been growing for generations in American life.
Yeah.
And I think that part of what's interesting is that. Um, in recent years, in part in sort of the intellectual dark web phenomenon of several years ago, where you had Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and these kind of folks sort of finding common cause for a while, and their audiences sort of growing together until it sort of split apart and whatnot. But I think that there's a degree to which you have sort of like traditional liberals and traditional conservatives who sort of fall into the camp, that big camp of people who are tired of the polarization, sort of remembering that, like, oh, for all of the fights we had in the 90s and so forth about gay marriage and taxes and whatnot, that there really are fundamental commitments towards the free exchange of ideas and freedom of speech, and treating people as individuals and not simply as groups, that allowed some core commitments of humanism and religious traditionalism to kind of come into harmony with each other. People sort of realizing, like, maybe we always had more in common than we realized. But part of what has prompted that realization towards the center has been concern over the wings, that suddenly we've got
Yeah.
sort of new groups on the right and left that are scaring us more than we used to scare each other. you know,
Yeah.
so that has been a cause for some empathy across this traditional divide, right? But I think that for a long time, people of religious conscience have felt themselves sort of squeezed out of mainstream liberal institutional life in this country. And it's meant that there have been parallel societies that have sort of evolved over time in America, where one part of America speaks in sort of a secular framework, reasons from a secular framework, and I'm not saying that like that is intrinsically a bad thing. I think you and I both have probably learned a lot and been influenced by the Enlightenment and the traditions of philosophy that have themselves done a lot to inform our democratic republic, right? The founding fathers and so forth. The founding fathers were, of course, also people of faith, and and the early settlers, and certainly the African Americans who were raised in church and who brought a revived sort of relationship to Christianity with them as they left the chains of slavery and sort of populated the South and beyond. This rich evangelical culture, which has found itself joining stream with the larger religious pluralism in American life. The language of faith and spirit that we share there doesn't always flow into the rest of our society, and so with these hard divisions between the two, we are not able to speak from conscience to conscience, really,
Yeah.
because we're not able to take our languages from one place to the other, whether it's people who are more secular or people who are more religious. And I think that somehow or another we've got to break that barrier. We've got to find a way to sort of allow us to speak in the deeper language of conscience that folks have on the religious side and on the secular side and all the permutations in between, if we're going to be able to speak through the heart. Essentially, I think we need to get back to the point to where we are genuinely speaking from the heart in a way that can allow us to reawaken the connections of the heart. And I do think that that's what Martin Luther King Jr. helped accomplish in the nonviolent movement. He was able to speak in a language that appealed to the values of both faith and humanism, right? In a way that showed that there was a transcendent way of being that linked the better angels of our nature from left to right, black to white, right? And it transformed the conscience of America for a time. I think we have to find a way to do something along those lines here at our own time. And I hope that Braver Angels can be a part of that.
And man, what a way to close it down. I just want to say amen. But and Martin Luther King Jr. is a hero of mine. But as we get to the end, where can people find you and access your wisdom?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Deke. You can first of all, I encourage folks to consider joining up and being a part of this movement for civic renewal. Braver Angels is a membership organization. We very likely have an alliance near you. Whether we do or don't, you can get involved at braverangels.org. And for folks who want to keep up with me directly, you can find me on Twitter and on Instagram. I think I'm on Facebook too at John R. Wood Jr. I am just grateful to be in this work and in the company of folks like yourself, Deke, who are, I think, a light and a blessing on what sometimes can feel like a pretty dark world of politics. And so, brother, I'm glad to be on this road
No,
with you,
man.
my friend.
Absolutely. And man, I feel the same, and we're going to win. Last question. What on a daily basis puts a smile on your face and brings joy to your heart?
Well, I'm happy to have many answers to that question. Incredible friends, incredible family. I've got 3 kids: Elijah, Jeremiah, and Abigail, 12, 8, and 6, who put both smiles and grimaces on my face on a daily basis, depending on what they're getting up to. Yeah, but I remember I was on the computer once, and my daughter, she was, I think, this was maybe a year or two ago. She was 4 or 5, but I was in the middle of sort of stressing out over some deadline or something. And she just walked over to me, and without saying a word, she reached her hand up, and I sort of bent down to see what she wanted. And she just grabbed each side of my face, and she just pulled me into a tender little kiss, and then just kind of scampered off in the other direction. And when I sat back and I went back and looked at my computer, I could not remember why I was frustrated about anything, you know. It's like life is perfect the way it is, you know. And so, you know, when you've got love in your life, um, it it transforms everything else. And I think that gift of love is just, you know, just what we want to give to each other and what we want to give to America. As complicated as everything seems, uh, you know, love is what prevails in the end.
Man, the perfect way to close out. Totally agree. We have got so much work to do in the future, but John, thank you for being a tremendous guest. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you to Brave Little Angels as well.
Thank you, Deke. Always a pleasure.
All right, that's all the time we got. Dropping the mic, and we are out.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to or watching the Changemaker podcast today. Greatly appreciate it. If you're listening and you want to see the video, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Deke Copenhaver. That's a pretty easy to remember, I would think. But really, we also want to remind you to like, subscribe, rate across all platforms, download. And if you're looking for a coach, a speaker, or anything, you know where to find me. Just email me at dekecopenhaver.com. And thanks so much for listening.